Joining me now is someone who knows a lot about all of these things, and that is former general counsel at the FBI, Andrew Weissmann, one of everybody's favorite legal eagles. So, Andrew, I want to just talk about this very high-stakes day in D.C. on Tuesday. This hearing in the D.C. Appeals Court over presidential immunity. It's a big deal. So once those oral arguments take place this week, once they're done, how soon do you expect them to rule? What does the calendar look like on that case, potentially?
Well, they can take as much time as they want, but there's a data point to suggest that they're going to move very quickly, and that is the schedule that they set to hear this case. This was, in legal terms, really lightning speed. All of the briefing was done over the holidays. They had all full briefing by January 2nd, and then 1 week later, for this Tuesday, they have oral arguments. So I would be surprised if we do not have a decision within a week or two after that. And the main issue there is, I think there's no question that Donald Trump is going to lose on his argument that he is somehow absolved of all possible criminal liability because he was a former president. I think that is a dead loser. The main issue is that currently there is a full stay of the trial date. And so that was scheduled, and it technically is still scheduled for March 4th. But the thing I'm keeping my eye on is what happens to that stay. Does the D.C. Circuit do anything to tighten up any steps that Donald Trump can take after it rules to delay things further, or whether they're going to allow the trial court to move forward quickly?
Yeah, I mean, as you have raised many times and taught all of us a lot about, I mean, a lot of this is about using legal tactics to delay in pursuit of his goal of delaying all of this. And you're out with this great piece on MSNBC.com this morning about the ways in which the appeals court could basically unstick this whole process. So talk us through what that looks like.
Sure. So to understand this, as my colleague Mary McCord says, there's something called an interlocutory appeal. Sorry to get into the weeds, but the normal rule in a criminal case is that nothing goes up to an appellate court until the case is over. In other words, until there's a verdict. You have a trial and the jury decides one way or the other what should happen. That's the normal time that there's an appeal. There are very few exceptions to that. And this apparently falls into an exception. And I say apparently because it is really not clear that this should have been allowed for what's called this interim or interlocutory appeal. And so it seems pretty clear that the D.C. Circuit is going to talk about that on Tuesday. They actually issued an order to the parties saying, please come prepared to talk about a variety of issues that were raised by Friends of the Court briefs, where this was raised by one of the Friends of the Court in a brief about whether this stay should be in effect, whether they're allowed to bring this up now. So stay tuned for the discussion on Tuesday about that issue.
Oh, that's a big thing to watch. It sounds like. Okay, now, Andrew, can't let you go without asking you, because I'm sure you saw that the former president called you Jack Smith's slimeball boss. Anyone who knows you thinks that's insane, or anyone who watches you. But I wanted to give you an opportunity to respond to that.
Sure. I don't think there's anything that I can say that hasn't just been better said by the Maine Secretary of State about these kinds of ad hominem attacks. I would sort of separate out into two things. One is the sort of use of adjectives and adverbs. That is not legal argument. That is not a factual argument, any more than if you say the election was stolen. You need to have facts. Adjectives and adverbs is not a way of arguing, especially for someone who had been the leader of the free world, let alone anyone else. And I think that's really important. On the substance, which is to suggest that somehow I am Jack Smith's boss, again, where are the facts of that? I have had zero communications with Jack Smith or his team. They are independent, both within the Department of Justice and certainly for a legal analyst on MSNBC.
Well, that is a very disciplined and graceful response, totally expected from you. Andrew Weissmann, thank you as always for joining us.